1960 ana omo eye agreement no mebere bi wan hwa no agumani mu ase mo mehwe me ye ko school ni ye kira ye mathematics bi eye simple mathematics bi say opese ohu ne dodo a opese ohu de dantem a ofa dodo no kosoro na de yeketo de aba ase na de aba yi ato ha minus no na watete afrim me pa cho ye te 0 fi 3 mu ebeka 3 says in ntimi free 12 no nti ebekwa ko boro bi wo 0 no ho but ye boro wo 0 ho 0 we hwe nti oni bibia nti ye beba 1 no ho ne 2 no ho ne abeboro nti ye boro a ne move 2 decimal places mathematics for no motias asempesre many abrio nti ye boro 1 every 2 you ho nti 2 decimal places waba be ka 2 ho oba obeka 2 no ho enya 3 me pa chaw ebe ye 12 said ye kire o school mu na into 12 minus 6 is 6 aha ye hwe ana hanso aka 1 nti ebe ye 00 nti bibinti ana me yes aka calculation nti since 1960 French for 14 countries no epeso omudu omu ho free eye France aban nsaase no ena France aban no eni mpanimfo wo mu crew emra anasa agreement makomako du baako eba se saafo no omo nsan ne mene wo ka sai sa krata no eye adwuma bepem enne emfinhia diosiam yensa 63 good years ni bepem enne no sa agreement no eye adwuma na nyabotre ne di machi agreement no de dikan nie was the colonial debt to repay the benefit of colonization. Not to say, that is to say that the newly independent states must reimburse the cost of infrastructure built by France during colonialism. The dikan pa ye say amani amose mo pa mu independence ni nyina no ye France fo ya bedi mo so no a de ye mu bia no muntumi nka ho hwe no Mosamo pay independence, I die be ye see ye be a cabia ya bow crum habiano, but triaka, and the first one a decline. Yatosum yeno, automatic confiscation of national financial reserve. T. Automatic confiscation of national financial reserve. Ninina say, or said that is to say that the African countries must deposit their financial reserve with the Banque de France. That's the Bank of France. Thus, France has been guarding the financial reserves of 14 African countries since 1961. Almost around 1960, no, it took effect in 1961. To 62 years in year, no, South African countries, women now more reserves, no, France, and who are there say, and that's France, and Heswa. Eno NNA number 2 enti Benin yabubo mudin epacho time enti Benin o man bi te say Burkina Faso o man bi ete say Guinea Bissau o man bi te say Ivory Coast Yekoya ni mwa Mali eka ho Niger eto aso Senegal ewom Togo echire haye owo ho se papa bi se ne ho kire na papa bi suru a na se ba ku suru a na che se Togo ben ne pa enti de beba no mesro mo mo hwe na ma no enye nkomo na mpese menimudi mo facho munya abotre nti ebra so a ya mo afre ufri hono mo Cameroon na ukọ the Central Africa Republic nti Central Africa Republic Chad eka ho Oman Chad eka ho Congo Brazzaville Congo eka ho ena Equatorial Guinea so Guinea. Last one, Gabon. Ye, ene amai edunaya. Wono, adi me biri bi mbahwe na momwa me obiri bi hu na em se opese o ya na o ye niam ho se mo ha ne oh you enti de wo mu ne second adia ewo sa enkomonum no eye se sa amani ya machochiro mudin aye Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad Republic, Congo, and Equatorial Guinea, as well as Gabon. No? Womo, Emfa, Womo, reserves. And also musika, SSA this year, Sika Sasso Modebak on Homa, Edesha or Minor, Edu or Minor Hujumano, Sassicano, SSO Medicogu Bank of France, not France for and a Shasho. Nati, the governance of monetary policies remains asynchronous, and I say it remains in the power, total power, and incomplete due to the fact that it is directly managed by French without any link with the financial authorities of countries such as ECOWAS or CIMAC. Nacha se sikana sa maniamani we wo munde kwakwo gu Bank of France no sa sikano yanya amani we ni sutumi anna sa bra no na ECOWAS yete because ache ana we chemu a ECOWAS na say organization bia wo ye to me organization ebi ti say European Union e ye organization ye union eno ma form enti no France for yes ade ni we ya Africa for we mu no sign sa agreement no ese chenchene twan wo mbekọ no a wo musika ni nyina bekọ gugu no wo mu de a share enti ase ni mu anasa agreement ni mu say sa amani we musika no so mu don ekuo bi kra wa bibi mamu o Africa mamu hanu kra na sa ko ni bi ti sa CIMAC sa ko ni bi ti sa ECOWAS entumi emehye France say wo meyi o musika no emfa mu omu na tienie. In addition to this, due to the condition that bind the banks of the 14 countries to the CFA economy or the CFA economy and financial zones, they are obliged to keep 65% of their foreign exchange reserves in an operations account maintained by the French Treasury, as well as an additional 20% in order to cover risk of financial risk. Entity sana manamane for we nyina no wo musika mo de ya wo for international reserves no 65%. Entisa Burkina Faso wo sika no mo 65% no wo de kokoto an active bank account mu e wo France ni sika wo woni nyina o wo de mo 65% to France. Now what they are to France no. Now what sounds what time sikano 65 not as akasa in 45. Because 100% 65 no be man is aka 45. Out of the 45% no. Yes say you 20%. For be financial risk prevention. Not just say what you say sikano 20% as akoka ho. Sir, we say 65% no. Yes, also the 20% and 65% no home buying. If it's a 65% now, what the abano? At the active account to me, active treasury account to ma. At say, ya do sikani did you ma? We are benefiting, we are investing your money. Usikana, yeah, invest usikano. Sakofa usika bra. Now usikana wakofa the abano. Safa bra, saba security. And answer what they be bought. 65 for no home buying. Until at the end of the day, no 85% will move reserves in Yinano, our France. Utin number 2, no, and in the Hunsuns and so on. In addition, the banks of CFA zones impose credit limit on each member country equivalent to 20% of the state revenues. In the current budget year, although back. And then other organizations have higher withdrawal possibilities from the French Treasury. These withdrawals must first be the subject of agreement of the French Treasury. The final decision, therefore, rests with the French Treasury, which has itself invested the reserves of the African countries on the Paris Stock Exchange. And he said, since account ne active account ntino, and it say account no, and I say sikane gumuno ya di juma. And he says sikane di gumuno ya di juma. Here for ya di juma, the Paris Stock Exchange. Where musikano? What is 65 akoto? Yase for 20%. Esa bebo de odi abeto hono ban. But me odi abeto me hono, me disikane ye adwuma. Enti risk 20% na wo wudi usiki abeto hono mu to prevent risk no. And as a risk bi aba meba betie free mu no. Sa sikana ye di ye adwuma no. France na edi sa sikano. France na sikana ye ne die o. France na according to agreement wudi sikana ma no asa di sikaba be si a kire dia ma no. Ana onu ni invest sikano no onu ni di. Ana wote ho na komode. Ya kira de bi yedi nkomo. In other words, 85% of African financial reserves are deposited in an operation account controlled by the French administration. The two banks in the CFA zone are Africa by their names, but do not decide any of the monetary policies by themselves. The worst thing is that the countries themselves do not even know how much of their financial reserves are due for them. Sikana 62 years ago, Womasha said they are to 65%, reserve 65%, even Wana watesa a French speaking countries we muno. Womu bia ne honoma wonim sikana ne dodo abepeme ne. Udu sika koto bank. Now the koto treasury bills are winning percentage enti. Efie ne koni nyina no wonim mfaso dodo awanya. But abepeme ne. These 14 African countries are macho churo mudi. Mabobo din ya kire wi a. Womu wa Central Africa na omu di CFA franc no. A omu ye the colonies and as France na ye omu colonial masters no. Womu nyina sika we no egu honom a bepem ne womu nim sika na no. Womu banks wo krom honom. The banks are ye buni say eno na ye banks wo these French speaking countries no. They are just banks by name for these countries, but they are banks by administration and ownership by France. That is the second agreement that was signed. The third agreement, the right of first refusal on any raw or natural resource discovered in the country. This is to say that France has the first right to purchase the natural resources of the land of its former colonies. It is only after France has said, I am not interested, that the African countries are allowed to look for other partners. Entity, say 14 countries we, emu bi enya uranium, lithium, gold, whatever, copper, bibia obenya biya no, say wabatonia, this wadi kanya ko France ho, ama France, aja akasa wampe, and son wetimi dia ko ejafo from man so akwa koton. Enti, all these 14 African countries, you know, all their natural resources must first of all be sold to France. And that's what they call France for you will go to Mope. Ya pacho monton from my France for you will go to Yasrama Monyana monton from my until France for us a yampe untumin cotton baby. That is the agreement. Yenipa will do freedom, Emma or no. Yenipa or person will free no. No. The also 9 was a priority to French interest and companies in public procurement and public tenders. Mami French Mukakra was saying the awarding of public contracts. French companies have priority over tenders, even if African countries can get better value for money elsewhere. As a result, in most of the former French colonies, all the economic levers and of the country are in the hands of French expatriates. Okay. Somebody a year Côte d'Ivoire bridge be example. Share Ubeye construction, Ubeye bibi, ade bia Ubeye no these French speaking countries no hono bia no. Asasa edi kan company a free France emam ana obi otemanum awe France ni awo di dwuma no wono ne company to say be road construction ye be cocoa processing ye be see a government building bia esasa ye de ko France ni bi company mu anasa de ko ma France aban no company bi ansa na even if say obi wo Mali ngo betimi asidan ni ye agisika ketwa kura na emra ne makwan se enhyehyeye ne makwan se wo de bekwa akoma sa nipa na wo Mali na wo Ghana na wo South Africa no esesa wo de koma France na se wo muka so mo mpa ansa no watimi de akoba ebi na to Laurent Gbagbo ewo Ivory Coast opeso osi the plateau no France for this scan ba osi scan no sondodo China for so my kakra bi ebe ya momo Laurent Gbagbo wo ne hwan ne sa wo de contract ba balance me abetna baby wo ye puppet no wo ye John kra wo ye sapofunu bi ya ntomago a wo ye de utiatia form no wo be fa ya chi na wo nkai sa number 4 ho. Number 5, exclusive right to provide military equipment and train military officers of the colony. Exclusive right. Chase wo mu wo tumi a is undisputed. Ebra wobotete asrafo ene eniema asrafo be yusu no eba ne saade na France for ewo exclusive right ewo these African countries no so na obi di soldier so obi di wasra dom so a na chese wodi so wotwe mutan wodi so asrafo enya asrafo na akọ Gabon akọ eku no awo mu ye military leaders no enti so obi ti baabi na asrafo a wo mamu eye ne dia asrafo be training a just wakasa munya training sa asrafo be nya tuo just say munya tuo sa nipa no ye bi wo honom sa dia na cho say wono na wo ya akoahye na se na cho so wono no wodi kan ye ku kra mpo de atia dada na hunim esansa ye ntu ni ku di tanti no wonya hu se ku no no wodi kan ye wa ye ku wo paper so wabo wasa bra usu obi a okuta military sa military ana akwa pamo obi ewo baabi ana ye friend say eyeku di tade a obi a beka kire me say me was exclusive right to your military, exclusive right to the training and every single input in your military no na nipa ko no wodi kan ye oku di ta meboa. These are the factors and me the meaning of coup d'etat by you abantu go soldier abantu go and me did the meaning ni by do the meaning ni by no do the meaning ni by no one na tell me say it is one do the meaning ni by no it is one soldier ni bi baba betu aban bi agu ena ya be fe ni military coup d'etat and answer junta that military action mesre enti say at Ghana nanka ye military no will be exclusive right our military no so a say nipa no ka chem say hey muntu akwasi mfiri ho no ma ade na ebeba ye betu akwasi afiri because all exclusive right tinacha say already no military coup d'etat no ekoso dada ewo ho but will be fufuro ena coup d'etat na ye ne de enti ye modin ye nkasa ye toaso de toaso nsia was it the right for France to deploy troops and intervene militarily in the country to defend its interest not just say France awo ho kwan say what they asrafo ebaba be good Niger, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Central African Republic, Togo, Niger, Congo, Gabon, baby biara wo pebia in these 14 African countries, you know. Say what na bibi koso no as a French government, you know. Adienu nko ye mano na sa wo hwe na nsha wasasa wa right to say wo ho kwan so be fast rafo no de mo ba begum na chase wo be take military operation no they come here and say what they are tilted the situation into its favor, its interest. The tosunsia no and until now these 14 African countries are so you be ata follow international news not follow news pa ubongu said there are a lot of military operations across all in these areas and most of them are the France operators. Number 7, The obligation to make French the official language of the country and the language for education. France for ni bedru yano. Na Congo for mukasa. Ivory Coast no mukasa oho. Enya French nkwa ne kan na Ivory Coast. Burkina Faso enya French nkwa ne kan oho. Togo enya French nkwa ne kan oho. Togo for no we agbani na obowura Togo okasa no anu obi anim so wodu ho. We kotokori ni na obowura Togo obi anim so wodu fie. We are Kotokoli wa Ghana. Ubo Burkina Faso obi anim so wodu fie. And you know, there are other languages which are actually the languages of these people. Now Sutie signed the pact or the agreement signed in 1960 as ahead of its implementation in 1961. You know, say ya no ukodua French nkwano muka. Ene asimi goita awa Mali. Edi ababa tuja say French no we ye free ho mpensem hunu bia entimi nya ne national language. Was the constitution no? Ye din komoba. Edi entini ye tetia mu, edi entini ye kasa. Ye din komoba. Eno mo sign this agreement no to ho, ene dane enhye say Africa amani we mu 14 we mu no. French speaking African countries no. By force to say French, and the bachelor deal school. By force to say French, and the bay official language. Oh, mine into a minor language. If you move beyond, young fan pebe being found to the Toson watching. The obligation to use the CFA franc, that is the franc of the French colonies in Africa. CFA franc, you know. Now, such no. The CFA franc, the franc of the French colonies. Edina ida sikano sono eno kompo chasa wo yakwa sikana omudi no eno kwa chasa wo da so ya yakwa the CFA 1960 up until 2023 adai in the 21st century adai enti okwa ya wa West African franc na cha say French-speaking countries, which is Burkina Faso ni Togo. Mo ben ye border sra mo ye West Africa no. Ye ba the sub-region demarcations na. Wo mo no edi the West African franc. And how come finfini ho no so a ye wa the Central African franc. The word chire na me na odi hu nkomo. The toso enkron. Or the obligation to send to France an annual balance sheet and a report on the state of reserves. No report, no money. Wobaka se mi twa wontro. Wobaka se mi bo misrem na makasa. We agreement da ho. That is to say that the director of the central banks of the former colonies presents the side report as the annual meetings of the ministers of finance on the former colonies. This report is then compiled by the Banque de France and French Treasury. Some of us are reporting now, Mwankasa musika na mudi mu 65% aba by force no. Mu hia sika ni bia de semo bebo bosia me yesa de nsi hu asi mu ho no. Sa bosia na mu bebo de afiri mwankasa musika mu a. Mwankasa musika mu 20% ene risk allowance and say security for sa sika no. One first report no ankwa. One kasa usika no agreement number 9 say no money for you. And so a come back what a care in the last 15 years. Never money a come ekumu ewa bibibam. Never some bois. Se Guinea Bissau nka ho akasa meboa. Se Benin nka ho akasa meboa. Se Burkina Faso nka ho akasa meboa. Se Congo nka ho akasa meboa. Bia ekoma nkasa eku wonipa ekom timi ku nipa 1.6 million afebako aye Congo bia ekom timi ku nipa afebako aye Burkina Faso oba Guinea Bissau wodi cha Cameroon Chad adan bia na panyi bi ne ho dodo no anasa bia na report ni nyankoduru ya report ni nkoduru nti komasi akomna asie no nipa ewuo nipa hire won kwa ewo ho na wo biti baby pai human rights no wasensan sa agreement we na wo de sadie we de atechire ne yonkokọ wo wi a no obegina simpie so no pai human rights No agina simpie so no opai nyamesam. Na wasensan san krata we e de akyekere nipa dom we na kwamu ku nipa. Wo de akyekere won sagu wachi, wakyekere won nan na wo de solid paper sa bia wa no. Wabo brausu. De to so du. Yan phone numbers then to so. De to so du nie. Renounce any military alliance with other countries unless authorized by France. Se wo hwa na wo Ivory Coast. Na se wo hwa na Ghana ye military ye good. Wo pesa wo de ho bedon ye military na. Why France so want ase. Wo ye Gabon president. Wo so one Ghana president. Mo ye military exercise bi abo. Ye makwan under these rules. They are also do bako. The obligation to ally with France in the event of war or global crisis. And yet by force, and you unset obligation, unset. Yes, shall say, Sasabio Tafrata, a kumbi basso, we any be ba, Nasa France in here, Musoja foa. And you unset somebody soldier for no common France for. Sa France in here soldier for, and the Kodiakon, and will be Russia. What turns side from one? As a some brother soldier for, no the Kodiakon. Entity. So what I can kind Abakwasam, Edward near the history, politics, colonization, neopolitics, geopolitics. What do we need to do? Wobahons a Sabia way is prone to a lot of coup d'etats and coup attempts. Another day, Yasoreya, Gabon say, Wakoku. Among fun tiasie. Medino, the friend of being tiasie, Timpasa tiasie.